Welcome to the Vegas Insider channel here on YouTube as we break down best bets for college football coming up week 9. Kevin Rogers with you, joined by Brian Edwards. And Brian, it's good to see you again. 3 best bets, 2 in the SEC, 1 in the Big 12. Let's start in the Southeastern Conference. In Jacksonville, the world's largest outdoor cocktail party. Florida, Georgia, Bulldogs, a heavy favorite here. Who do you like?
I like my Gators plus 22.5. Our old friend Mark Lawrence, according to his database, going back to 1980, this is the richest spread Georgia has had as a favorite against Florida in 4+ decades, and it is richest by 8.5 points. Since 80, Georgia's only been favored by double digits over Florida 3 times, and the largest was last year, a 14-point spread, which they covered. But Florida actually out-yarded Georgia in that game. That game was 3-0 Georgia with less than 3 minutes left in the first half, and Florida just committed 3 turnovers in a row in right before halftime, deep in its own territory, and that just kind of turned it into a and I mean, that just ended the game right then and there. But Georgia, I know they ended up winning by, big margins over Vanderbilt and Auburn. But they really have not looked like the dominant team that they were last year since those wins or those blowout wins over Oregon and South Carolina in weeks 1 and 3, respectively. And those blowout wins have aged fantastically, because Oregon hasn't lost since and has covered every game except for that one in Pullman. And Bo Nix looks spectacular. And now South Carolina's won 4 in a row. But since those games, they just haven't something hasn't been clicking like it was in those 2 games and all of last season, with the exception of the SEC championship game in Atlanta last year. Look, Florida has got issues defensively, but if not for that horrible roughing the passer call on Gervon Dexter, Florida had all the momentum, would have been down 7 with the ball near midfield with 5.5 minutes left. But the Dexter nonsense roughing the passer negated that interception. And then LSU chewed up some clock and then made a long field goal to make it a 10-point game with like a minute 40 left, and that game was over at that point. But look, if Billy Napier does anything well, besides recruit, which he does a really good job of, but it's cover as an underdog. As a head coach, he's been an underdog 18 times. He's 14-3-1 against the spread with 9 outright wins. At Florida, he's 2-0 as a dog with 1 outright win, the Utah game, and then covering against Tennessee. And if we go back to 1989, which obviously is a long time ago, more than 3 decades ago, Georgia's only beaten Florida by more than 22 twice. And the other one, besides last year's 34-7 win, was the game against McElwain, when he was literally, or it was nationally reported that he was fired that morning, like, 8 or so hours before kickoff. So that was obviously an awkward situation for UF. And indeed, he was fired later that night. Those are the only 2 times Georgia's beaten Florida by more than 22 since 89. So I made this number 16.5. It's too rich. I think Georgia probably wins by 14-17. I say that because Florida's defense is so bad, can't get off the field on 3rd down. But I do think if Anthony Richardson plays great, if he plays like he played against Tennessee, except for the red zone fumble, and if he plays like he did against Utah, Florida, could definitely make this an interesting game, 1-possession game. I think with their defensive struggles, it's more likely to be Georgia by 14-17. But I definitely like the Gators catching more than 3 touchdowns.
All right, now let's shift to another SEC matchup. Arkansas and Auburn, Razorbacks favored on the road. And obviously Arkansas a little better when KJ Jefferson is healthy. You saw that in the BYU game a few weeks ago. They put 52 up on BYU. Auburn, decent performance against Ole Miss, but still the Tigers in the dumps a bit. So who do you like here between Arkansas and Auburn?
Well, Auburn has won 6 in a row in this rivalry, but we all know how bad Arkansas got robbed by the officials 2 years ago. Bo Nix clearly fumbled the snap. It should have been a fumble, and the refs inexplicably blew the whistle because he was trying to go into a spike it motion and spike the ball, with just a few seconds left to set up a game-winning field goal. But he clearly fumbled the ball. I believe the refs got suspended. I know they should have. But anyhow, then they lost at home to Auburn last year, but I was looking at the box score earlier. The Razorbacks actually had 9 more first downs. It was a very evenly played game. A scoop and score for Auburn was really the big swing in that game. But the Razorbacks, look, they had the heartbreaker against A&M, where they completely outplayed them. The next week, I mean, it's a one possession game against Alabama, 28-23. They've knocked out Bryce Young, and it's 3rd and 14 from Alabama's own 15, and Milroe scrambled for 70 plus yards, which showed how bad they missed Jalen Catalon. If not for that play, who knows how that game goes. And then Jefferson gets a concussion, so he has to miss the game at Mississippi State. But then in a horrible spot 2 weeks ago at BYU, they were flying for the 3rd time in 4 weeks. They were going across country into altitude. They, get a big win, 52-35 at BYU. Jefferson threw for 367 yards, 5 touchdowns, no interceptions. Rocket Sanders ran for 175 yards, 2 touchdowns on just 15 attempts. I think Sanders is going to run all over Auburn, and I like Arkansas to exercise 6 years of frustration on Auburn to get the win and cover this short number. 4 at most spots, but a couple of 3.5s out there. If your number's 3.5, and it's obviously early in the week, and you can buy the half point at the key number of 3, I would recommend doing so.
Okay, now let's go to the Big 12, Oklahoma State and Kansas State. You had Oklahoma State last week on this video, Brian, and they ended up beating Texas. They were down double digits in the 3rd, came back, and Mike Gundy continues to thrive as an underdog, and now they're a short dog against Kansas State, who ended up blowing that lead against TCU, had a shot to beat TCU last week, but ended up losing. K-State has some injuries. So who do you like here, K-State, Oklahoma State?
Yeah, well, K-State's 2 best players, Adrian Martinez and Deuce Vaughn, are both questionable. Martinez left the game last week after the first series. The backup, Will Howard, who I don't think is very good, he's played a lot the last couple of years because Skylar Thompson, ran a lot and was often injured. So Howard's started quite a few games the last 2 years. He played good in the first half last week. They're up 28-10 late second quarter, but not so much in the second half. And he also got banged up, and he's listed as questionable. Obviously, we're early in the week, so we don't know how those injuries are going to play out. But I made K-State -1.5 with Martinez, and I made Oklahoma State -3 without Martinez. So it's sitting at +1.5 now. Obviously, we as I noted, we don't know where those guys will be at later in the week. But I just think I like Oklahoma State regardless. And you mentioned Gundy's thriving as an underdog. It was a home dog spot last week, but he's 9-3 against the spread. His last 12 road dog spots. And, Spencer Sanders' shoulder was not hurting him a couple weeks back. I think they would have won that game. They lost to TCU in double overtime, and I think they would still be undefeated. So Oak State went 12-2 last year. They've only got 1 loss this year. Now I do gotta say I couldn't believe Gundy's clock management in the end of the first half last week. But aside from that, he's been doing an outstanding job, and has beaten so many ranked teams in his storied tenure. And I like Oklahoma State in this game.
They're looking better than their friends down the street in Norman, who are going to leave to be in the SEC soon. So right now, things are looking good for Oklahoma State. We'll see what happens when they face OU coming up in Bedlam next month. So let's recap Brian's 3 best bets for Saturday. He likes the Gators getting the points against Georgia, also Arkansas laying the points with them against Auburn, and backing Oklahoma State on the road against Kansas State. Brian, tell us about your college football podcast we can find on Vegas Insider.
Yeah, the Bet CFB pod number 21 dropped yesterday as Scott Manzieri and I recapped the Week 8 highlights, games, results, etc. And yeah, so it's twice a week. It drops on Mondays and Thursdays. And so we'll be recording on Wednesday this week for the week 9 edition. And Jay Greason in the Chattanooga Times Free Press will be my guest. He's hilarious and he's very insightful. Auburn grad, but covers Tennessee up there, and he'll have lots of good SEC intel.
That is Brian Edwards. I am Kevin Rogers. Thanks a lot for watching, and as always, best of luck with your bets.